The security guard's hand wrapped around Emily Carter's arm before she could say another word. "You're done here," Dr. Harlan Voss announced, loud enough for the entire emergency department to hear. "Pack your locker. You're just a nurse. You were never anything more than that." 43 people heard it. Patients in curtained bays, orderlies frozen mid-step, a mother holding her sick child. Nobody moved to stop it. Then the automatic doors at the ambulance bay exploded open. Not from a gurney, not from a paramedic, but from 6 heavily armed special operators in tactical gear, weapons at the ready, scanning the room like they were clearing a combat zone. The lead operator locked eyes on Emily and moved directly toward her. "Step away from her, right now." If this story already has you gripped, follow along until the very end. Hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Emily Carter had spent the last 4 years pretending to be ordinary. She'd gotten pretty good at it. She clocked in at 6:45 every morning, changed into scrubs that were always slightly too large at the shoulders, and moved through Redstone Regional Hospital's emergency department with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to survive an environment was to become invisible inside it. She kept her head down. She answered to every doctor without argument. She charted her notes with the kind of precision that made charge nurses quietly grateful and attending physicians slightly uncomfortable, because her accuracy rate was the sort of thing that made people wonder why she wasn't doing more, and then not ask, because asking would require acknowledging it. Brookhaven wasn't a bad city. Mid-sized, wedged between 2 interstate systems in the Upper South, the kind of place that had a few good restaurants downtown and a football rivalry with the next county over that people took way too seriously. Redstone Regional wasn't a bad hospital either, as hospitals went. 16-bed emergency department, decent trauma bay, a cardiac unit that had won a Regional Excellence Award 3 years running, the kind of place where a person could do real work and not attract too much attention. That had been the plan. Emily was 31 years old. She had a 1-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from the hospital, a second-hand truck she'd bought with cash, and a coffee maker she genuinely loved. She ran 4 miles every morning at 5 a.m. because her body wouldn't let her stop, because somewhere in her muscle memory lived a version of herself that still woke up expecting the sound of rotors. She kept her military discharge paperwork in a manila envelope in the back of her closet behind her winter coats. She hadn't opened it in 2 years. She wasn't hiding, exactly. She just wasn't advertising. The morning everything came apart started the same way every other Thursday started. She took report from the night crew, Damaris, one of the travel nurses who always looked slightly haunted by 6 a.m., and began her assessment rounds. Bay 1, elderly male, with chest tightness and a blood pressure that needed watching. Bay 2, teenage girl with a laceration above her eye from a soccer collision, nervous mother asking questions faster than Emily could answer them. Bay 3 was empty. Bay 4 held a man named Raymond Polk, 58, who'd come in complaining of abdominal pain and was, Emily was increasingly certain, septic in a way the overnight team hadn't caught. She flagged it with the attending on duty, Dr. Melissa Nguyen, who took one look at the labs Emily had pulled and immediately ordered a full workup and a blood culture. Emily liked Dr. Nguyen. She was decisive, direct, didn't perform confidence, she just had it. The problem wasn't Dr. Nguyen. The problem arrived at 9:17, when Dr. Harlan Voss walked into the emergency department like he owned it, because in most of the ways that mattered inside Redstone Regional, he did. Voss was the chief of surgery. 54, silver-haired, built with the particular kind of physical authority that comes from never having been told no in a professional setting for about 20 years. He had trained at institutions whose names he dropped into conversation the way other people use punctuation. He had a framed magazine profile in his office. He chaired 3 hospital committees. The board of directors treated his opinions on staffing like scripture and his opinions on everything else like a strong suggestion from someone you couldn't afford to offend. He was also, and Emily had known this since her first week, the kind of surgeon who had confused his position with his worth so completely that the two had become indistinguishable. He came down to the ED to check on a post-op patient of his who'd been brought in overnight with fever and wound drainage. Bay 6. Emily wasn't assigned to Bay 6, but she was passing it on her way to grab supplies when she heard his voice rise. "Who ordered this dressing change?" She paused at the doorway. The patient, A woman in her mid-60s named Loretta Sims, who'd had a bowel resection 4 days earlier, was lying with the rigid posture of someone trying very hard to appear unbothered, while a doctor stood over her looking like he'd found a personal insult in the wound site. The nurse assigned to Bay 6 was Marcus Webb, one of the newer nurses, 2 years out of school and still in that phase where every interaction with a senior physician carried a slight current of anxiety. "I did, Dr. Voss," Marcus said. "The prior dressing was saturated, and there were early signs of maceration at the—" "I didn't ask for an explanation. I asked who authorized it." "The dressing change protocol. The protocol," Voss said, drawing the word out slowly, "is that changes to my post-surgical patient's wound management go through me. Through me. Not through a nurse making autonomous decisions about things that are outside their scope." Emily stepped into the doorway, not because she planned to. It was closer to reflex. "The dressing change is within scope," she said, keeping her voice level. "Saturated dressings on a post-op wound increase infection risk." Marcus acted correctly. Voss turned. He looked at her the way certain people look at things they don't believe should be taking up space. A slow, measuring look that was designed to communicate that this, whatever this was, wasn't going to go how she apparently thought it was. "And you are?" "Emily Carter. I'm one of the ER nurses." "Then I suggest you return to the ER." You're just a nurse," he said, "and you're speaking in a conversation that doesn't involve you, about a patient who isn't yours, in a department that you don't work in." He turned back to the wound site like she'd already ceased to exist. "Marcus, page my resident. I'll review this myself." Emily left the doorway. She went back to the supply room, pulled what she needed, and spent the next 30 seconds standing absolutely still with her hand on a shelf of IV tubing, breathing in through her nose and out through her mouth, the way she had taught herself to do in places where losing your composure would get someone killed. She went back to Raymond Polk, checked his pressure, adjusted his fluid rate, made a note about his temperature trending upward, and did her job. She thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. The second encounter happened at 11:40, in front of everyone. It came out of nothing, the way the worst things always do. Voss had returned to the ED. The official reason was to review a consult request, but Emily would later understand that wasn't really it. He'd been irritated since morning, and he was the kind of man who needed somewhere to put that. She happened to be standing at the nurse's station when he came through, reviewing a chart on the wall-mounted screen, and she happened to be slightly in his path, and she moved. She did move, she stepped aside, but apparently not fast enough, or not in the right direction, or not with the right expression, because he stopped. "You're still here," he said. She looked at him. "I'm on shift until 3. "You've been on my radar since this morning." He said it like this was a threat he was finally making good on. "I've been in this department for 16 years. I've watched nurses like you come and go. You know what the problem is? Some of you start to believe that because you're good at the technical parts, that translates to authority. It doesn't. You're support staff. Highly skilled support staff, sure, but that's the ceiling. That's where it stops." She could feel the station go quiet. Damaris, who'd stayed late doing paperwork, had gone very still. The unit secretary, a young man named Tobias, had his eyes fixed on his keyboard. A patient in a wheelchair waiting to be taken upstairs was watching with the polite horror of someone witnessing a car accident. Emily kept her expression neutral with the same effort it takes to hold a door shut in a high wind. "I don't think this is an appropriate conversation for the floor. I'll have conversations where I choose to have them." He took a half step toward the station. "I'm recommending to administration that your contract not be renewed. You don't fit the culture here. You create friction. Creating friction because I flagged a correct dressing change. Creating friction," he said, cutting her off, "because you have a fundamental misunderstanding of your role. And honestly, that's a kindness, what I just said, because the version where this goes through HR takes longer and ends the same way." He glanced at the unit secretary. "Can someone call security? I'd like Ms. Carter escorted off the floor while I speak with the charge nurse." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Tobias, who looked like he might be physically ill, picked up the phone. Emily stood there and did not move and did not speak and did not show him a single thing she was actually feeling, because she had been in situations considerably worse than this. And she knew from hard, specific experience that what you show a person in a moment like this either gives them power over you or takes it away. And she was not giving him anything. She was still standing there, absolutely still, when the security officer came through the double doors. Young guy, maybe 25, who had the look of someone who'd been told very quickly what the situation was and wasn't happy about it, but was going to do his job. His hand wrapped around her arm, gentle but real. "Ma'am, if you'll just come with—" The automatic doors at the ambulance entrance blew open, not the way they opened for gurneys, not the pneumatic slide and pause of a routine emergency transport. They hit the stops hard, both panels, and the sound of it cracked through the department like a rifle shot, and everyone's head turned at exactly the same moment. 6 men came through the door. Tactical gear, plate carriers, weapons slung low in a carry position that was ready without being aggressive. The particular configuration of people who'd spent years learning the exact amount of visible threat required to change the nature of a room without starting a war in it. They spread immediately, 2 to the left wall, 2 to the right, 1 hanging at the door, and the 6th walked directly toward the nurse's station with the focused, unhurried pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. He was maybe 35, Caucasian, short dark hair going gray at the temples, jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once and healed improperly, which somehow only added to an impression of fundamental structural soundness. His vest carried no unit insignia she could read at this distance, but his bearing was unmistakable. The particular kind of absolute physical authority that doesn't come from rank, it comes from being someone that other extremely capable people have consistently, over many years, chosen to follow. He scanned the room in 1 second flat and found Emily. He moved to her without breaking stride. He looked at the security guard whose hand was still on her arm. "Step away from her," he said. "Right now." His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It had the quality of a sound that occupies all available space without effort, and the security officer's hand dropped from Emily's arm in the way that hands do when the body has registered something the brain is still processing. Voss took a step forward. "Excuse me. Who authorized you people to enter this facility? This is a hospital. You can't just—" "Sir." The operative didn't even turn to look at him. His eyes were on Emily. "I need you to not talk right now." The absolute flatness in the way he said it stopped Voss mid-sentence in a way that nothing Emily had said in the previous 2 hours had come close to doing. The operative reached Emily and stopped, standing at a distance that was not close enough to be threatening, but was close enough to be unambiguous about exactly where he was positioned relative to everyone else in the room. He looked at her for a moment. Something passed across his face. Relief, maybe? Or the closest thing to it that his face was probably capable of producing. "Emily," he said, and the fact that he used her first name in this context, in front of all of these people, was its own kind of information. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for a long beat. "Bowen." "Yeah." "What are you doing here, Bowen?" "We've been looking for you for 3 days." He said it simply, like that explained everything. "I left a forwarding address." "I know. It took us 3 days because we were trying to do this quietly, and that's not going great." She almost smiled at that. "Who's down?" The shift in his expression was small and immediate and told her everything before he said a word. "Kessler's team. They were exfilling out of a site in—" He stopped, glanced at the 30 people currently standing in the immediate vicinity, staring at them. "A site. One of ours is critical. We need you." She looked at him for another moment. He looked back. This was a conversation they'd had before, in different forms, in different places, and it had never gotten any easier, and it probably never would, and that was something they both understood without saying it. "All right," she said. She turned toward the nurse's station. Tobias was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely classify. She thought about all the patients she'd been managing, thought about handoff logistics, thought about Raymond Polk and his trending sepsis indicators. "Can someone—" "I'll cover your patients." It was Damaris speaking from behind the station, her voice even. "Raymond Polk, Bay 4, watching for sepsis progression." "I'll take it." Emily looked at her. His temp was 38.2 at 1100. If it hits 38.8, push for ICU consult. "Got it." Emily pulled off her badge and set it on the counter. She didn't throw it or make anything out of it. She just set it down. Voss found his voice. What exactly is happening? Someone explain to me what is happening right now. One of the operators near the left wall turned to look at him for the first time. He was a big man, broader than the others, with the kind of sunburned neck that suggests extended time in unshaded outdoor environments. He looked at Voss with a calm, steady expression. Stand by, he said. I'm the chief of surgery at this. Sir, stand by. Voss closed his mouth. Bowen walked beside Emily toward the exit. She was still in her scrubs. She hadn't thought to grab anything else, and it hadn't occurred to her to. How long? She asked, not quietly. Unknown. The mission is still active. Classified site? Forward operating. We've got a field surgical kit, but nothing like what you're used to working with. What's his status? Last update 20 minutes ago, he was conscious, but his pressure was tanking. Their medic did what he could on the aircraft, but which aircraft? Blackhawks on the roof of the parking structure. We've got... She stopped walking. He stopped. She turned back. The whole emergency department was still watching. Patients, staff, the security officer with his hand now hanging empty at his side, Voss standing in the middle of the floor looking, for the first time since she'd known him, genuinely uncertain. She looked at Tobias. In my locker, there's a navy blue bag. Bring it to the parking structure. Tobias blinked. Right now? Right now, please. He was already moving before she finished the sentence. She turned back to Bowen. Who's on the bird? Mercer's driving. We've got Okafor and Santos. Okafor has the surgical kit? Affirmative. Okay. She started walking again. Tell me everything from the beginning. Bowen matched her pace exactly. The operators fell in around them in a loose perimeter as they moved toward the exit, and the emergency department watched them go. This woman in pale blue scrubs, surrounded by men with weapons and tactical vests, walking like she knew exactly where she was going, which she did, which she always had. The last thing Emily heard as the doors closed behind her was Voss, finding his voice somewhere in the wreckage of his certainty. Someone tell me who she is, he said. Nobody answered him right away. Then Damaris, without looking up from Raymond Polk's chart, said, I have no idea, but I think you just made a significant mistake. The parking structure roof was 3 levels up, and the Blackhawk was already spinning when they came through the access door into the gray morning air, the rotor wash hitting Emily immediately and pulling at her scrubs and her hair, which she still had up from shift. She ducked automatically, muscle memory, the kind that bypasses thought entirely, and moved under the rotor arc with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this in the dark, in the rain, in conditions considerably worse than a cloudy Thursday morning in Brookhaven. Okafor was already in the bay. She recognized him by the way he sat, spine absolutely straight, hands resting palm down on his thighs, the posture of someone managing profound stress through controlled stillness. He was ex-Delta, she knew, though she'd never asked him directly and he'd never confirmed it. On the stretcher beside him was a man she didn't know, which was somehow worse. Strangers had faces you hadn't yet learned to carry. She climbed in. The door slid. The bird lifted. Talk to me, she said, pulling on gloves from the kit. Sergeant First Class Darius Kwan, Okafor said immediately. 36. Penetrating abdominal trauma, right upper quadrant. Probable hepatic involvement. He lost significant volume at the site. We pushed 2 units of packed cells on the way out and got a partial response. Pressure came up to 90 systolic, dropped back to 78 in transit. Emily already had her hands on the man, Kwan, checking his abdomen. Rigid, tender even under sedation, she could see it in the slight contraction of his jaw. How long from injury? Approximately 90 minutes. He needs an OR. Nearest trauma facility is 40 minutes. What about Redstone? Bowen, in the co-pilot seat, turned partially. We can redirect. Do it. She was already working. He's bleeding into his belly and the window is closing. Redstone's administration might, but they... Bowen. She didn't raise her voice. Redirect the bird. A pause. The radio clicked. Redstone Regional, this is Tango 79er. We have a trauma incoming, estimated ETA 7 minutes. requesting trauma bay clearance and surgical standby. Emily had her hand on Kwan's wrist and was counting, her lips moving slightly. His pulse was there, thin, fast, but there. She could feel it like a question. Stay, it said with each beat. Stay, stay, stay. Stay with me, she said quietly. Not to herself, to him. You've got people waiting for you. Stay with me. The Brookhaven skyline appeared through the windscreen. Low buildings, water towers, the radio antenna on the hill outside the city center, and the hospital was visible. The Red Cross on the helipad visible from altitude, and she could see even from here that there were people already coming out to the roof, which meant the radio call had gotten through. She had 7 minutes. She had done more with less. Okafor, I need an additional IV line, large bore, left AC, and I need you to hold pressure here. She guided his hands. Here, okay? Don't let up. Copy. The helicopter banked. Kwan's blood pressure alarm went off, a flat electronic tone that cut through the rotor noise with the particular urgency of a sound calibrated to be impossible to ignore. Emily looked at the number on the monitor. She looked at Kwan's face. Faster, she said to Mercer in the pilot's seat. We need to go faster. She didn't know in that moment that Harlan Voss was standing at his office window on the 3rd floor of the hospital, watching the Blackhawk descend toward the helipad, and that somewhere in the complex defensive architecture of his certainty, something had begun, very quietly, to crack. She wasn't thinking about Voss at all. She was thinking about the man on the stretcher in front of her, and the particular mathematics of hemorrhagic shock, and exactly how many seconds she had left to change the outcome. Counting, always counting, the way she had learned to count in places where counting was the only thing that stood between order and chaos, between the person in front of you and the thing you couldn't take back. The helipad came up fast. She braced. The skids hit concrete, and Emily Carter, who had been called just a nurse 4 hours ago in front of 43 people, who had been walked out of her own department like a problem to be solved, who had spent 4 years making herself invisible in a city that didn't know what it was standing next to, climbed out of that helicopter and walked straight through the doors and back into the fight. She didn't slow down for the doors. The rooftop access stairwell was faster than waiting for the elevator, and she took it without thinking. 1 flight, 2 flights, through the fire door into the 3rd floor corridor, and then she was moving through the hospital she'd worked in for 4 years with the kind of purposeful speed that parts crowds without any need for announcement. The trauma bay was on the 1st floor. She knew every shortcut. Okafor and Santos had Kwan's stretcher moving behind her. She could hear the wheels, one of them slightly squeaky, she noted it absently, and Bowen's boots on the linoleum somewhere behind them. The elevator bank was ahead. She hit the button, looked at the numbers. Too slow. Stairs, she said. He's on a stretcher. There's a ramp at the east stairwell. She was already turning. Follow me. Nobody questioned it. That was the thing about moving with real certainty. People just followed. Not because they were told to, because something in the body recognizes the difference between someone who thinks they know where they're going and someone who actually does. The east ramp was exactly where she said it was. They moved Kwan's stretcher down it in a controlled descent, Santos at the head controlling the speed, Okafor maintaining pressure exactly where Emily had placed his hands, and she walked alongside monitoring the monitor clipped to the stretcher rail. Pressure still at 78, pulse rate climbing, oxygen sat holding at 93, which was acceptable but not where she wanted it. Talk to me about his last set of vitals in the field, she said. 64 systolic when we reached him, Santos said. Santos was compact, dark-haired, had a way of speaking that dispensed entirely with unnecessary words. GCS 15 at that point, he was asking questions. He dropped to GCS 12 in transit. That's when we pushed the 2nd unit. He was awake and asking questions at 64 systolic. Correct. He's tough. Yes, ma'am. The ground floor corridor opened up ahead of them, and Emily pushed through the double doors into the main ED hallway, and the first person she saw was Melissa Nguyen, who was standing there with the expression of someone who had received a radio call about a military trauma incoming and was either very prepared or very concerned, and possibly both. Emily. Dr. Nguyen took in the stretcher, the operators, the situation, with the rapid triage efficiency of a good emergency physician. Trauma Bay 1 is cleared. We've got surgical on standby. Sit. Dr. Hartwell's coming down. Good. Emily fell in beside her as they moved toward the trauma bay. Sergeant Kwan, 36, penetrating abdominal, suspected hepatic laceration, 90-plus minutes from time of injury. 2 units PRBC in transit with partial response, current pressure 78 systolic, pulse 112, sat 93. He needs to go straight to the OR. He won't tolerate any significant delay. Dr. Hartwell's already scrubbing. Tell Hartwell I want a damage control approach. Get in, control the bleeding, pack and close. No heroics on the first pass. Gwen glanced at her. I'll relay that. Tell him that's not a suggestion. Another glance. Shorter. Copy. They pushed through the trauma bay doors. The room was set. Nurses positioned, equipment ready, the overhead light throwing everything into sharp clarity. 3 nurses she recognized and 1 she didn't. A respiratory tech with the ventilator prepped. An OR tech standing by the doorway with the transfer checklist on a tablet, looking slightly overwhelmed by the number of armed men who had just followed a patient into the room. Okay, Emily said, moving to Kwan's left side as they transferred him to the trauma bay stretcher. 3 count, smooth. Let's get another large bore line in his right AC. I want a massive transfusion protocol activated. Talk to the blood bank. I need type specific if his blood type is in the system, otherwise uncross-matched O-neg. Repeat fast exam now. Let's confirm what we're dealing with. Emily? One of the nurses, Renata, who Emily had worked with for 2 years and who had never once raised her voice in the department, said her name with a particular inflection. Dr. Voss is in the room. Emily looked up. He was standing near the doorway, not in scrubs, still in his street clothes from his earlier visit, white dress shirt, sleeves not yet rolled up. He looked like he'd walked in without entirely thinking through what he was walking into, and now he was in it, and there was no graceful way to be here or not be here. His eyes moved from Kwan to Emily and back to Kwan, and then settled somewhere in the middle distance, the way eyes do when the brain is busy processing things that don't fit into existing categories. This patient needs to go to the OR, Emily said, not to him specifically, but to the room. Now, where is Hartwell? Right here. A new figure in the doorway. Dr. Renata Hartwell, the hospital's trauma surgeon, a woman in her 50s with a silver braid over one shoulder who looked like she'd been in operating rooms long enough to find them peaceful. She came in fast, took one look at Kwan's monitor, one look at the fast image that the ultrasound tech had just pulled up on the screen. Emily saw it at the same moment Hartwell did. Significant free fluid in the right upper quadrant. The liver silhouette disrupted at the posterior segment. He's bleeding actively, Hartwell said. Yes. Damage control app. Get in, pack it. Don't let the anesthesiologist talk you into a long case. Hartwell looked at her. It was a look that could have gone several ways. It landed on something like assessment. You're the nurse that... I'm the nurse that came in on the helicopter with him, yes. We can talk about everything else later. He's got maybe... Emily checked her watch without meaning to. Pure habit. A narrow window. I agree. Hartwell turned to the OR tech. Let's move. Tell the room we're coming in hot. They moved Kwan. The transfer was fast and professional, and Emily walked beside the stretcher until the OR doors, where she stopped because she wasn't scrubbed and she didn't have privileges, and those were real things that existed for real reasons, even now. She stood at the OR doors and watched them go through. Her hands were at her sides. She realized she'd still had her gloves on, pulled them off, looked for a trash bin, didn't immediately see one, held them. The doors closed. The hallway was quiet. Bowen appeared beside her. He had the quality, she'd always thought, of materializing in spaces rather than walking into them. You'd look one direction and he wasn't there, you'd look back and he was. He's in good hands, Bowen said. Hartwell's solid. She looked at the OR doors. He's got a chance. Because of you. Because Okafor kept pressure where I told him to, and Santos pushed the right amount of product in the field, and Mercer flew faster when I asked him to, and Hartwell is about to do what she does, which is her job. She finally found a trash bin, 10 feet down the hallway. walked to it, dropped the gloves. It's not a solo performance. Never was. A pause. Though I notice you're still doing it. She looked at him. 30 minutes ago, you were being escorted out of this building, he said. Now you just directed a trauma resuscitation and sent a patient to surgery. 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes ago, he agreed. She leaned against the wall. The hallway was still. The OR wing was quieter than the main ED, the sounds of the department muffled and distant. Somewhere above them, a ventilation system hummed. How'd you find me? She asked. Took 3 days. I know, you said. How? He was quiet for a moment. Your discharge address forwarded to a P.O. box. The P.O. box had a second forwarding order on it, to a general delivery at a post office in Brookhaven. We ran employment verification on every medical facility within driving distance. A beat. You didn't make it easy. That was the idea. I know. He said it without any edge. We respected it as long as we could. She looked at the OR doors again. Thought about Kwan, who was 36 years old and had been awake and asking questions at 64 systolic, which meant he was either genuinely tough or running on adrenaline, or both. Thought about the look on his face during transport, eyes closed but jaw tight, the specific expression of someone who is working very hard to still be there. What was the mission? She asked. I can't give you details. Classified. Deeply. Is it done? He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. Bowen. The rest of the team got out, he said. Kwan was the last extraction. There were complications. He shifted his weight slightly. It's done. She nodded, didn't ask more. She'd learned a long time ago which questions to ask and which ones to let go, and it was one of the things she still found difficult about civilian life, that there were no classified lines there, no natural borders around the things you weren't supposed to carry. Everything just sat in the open. She heard the ED double doors at the end of the hallway open and looked up. It was Harlan Voss. He'd changed into a coat, one of the hospital's white consultation coats, the kind that announces affiliation, and he was walking toward her with the particular gait of a man who has spent time recalibrating and believes he's found a workable position. Bowen straightened almost imperceptibly. Voss stopped about 6 feet from them. His eyes went to Bowen, then back to Emily. I want to be clear, he said, that the conversation earlier today was, I'm not having this conversation right now, Emily said. Ms. Carter. Sergeant First Class Kwan is in the OR. She kept her voice even. Dr. Hartwell is performing a damage control laparotomy. When there's news, someone will come and tell whoever is authorized to receive it. She looked at him. I'm going to go sit down. My shift ended. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 20 minutes ago. Voss stood there. She walked past him. She found a family waiting area around the corner. 6 chairs, a low table, a television mounted on the wall that was playing a news channel on mute. She sat down in one of the chairs, the kind of institutional chair that was just slightly too rigid to be comfortable, and she sat back and looked at the ceiling and let out a breath that she hadn't entirely realized she'd been holding. Her phone was in her locker. Tobias had never brought her the Navy bag. They'd moved too fast, gone to the roof, redirected the bird before he could get there. She was sitting in her scrubs with nothing, her badge still on the nurse's station counter. Bowen sat down across from her. He didn't say anything. He'd been doing that since the first time she'd met him, 7 years ago, in a prefabricated operations building in a location she couldn't name even now, just sitting in a space with her without filling it up. She'd always found it unusual, and then, over time, found it necessary. There are going to be questions, she said. Yes. From administration. Probably from more than that. She looked at him. He was looking at the muted television, some kind of political segment, people behind desks talking rapidly at each other. What does more than that mean? He turned from the TV. You're aware that Kwan's mission, even classified, still exists in a chain of command. And that chain of command became aware, approximately 40 minutes before we reached you, that there was a potential problem with the nurse who received the emergency call. What kind of problem? The kind where someone at this hospital filed a preemptive complaint about unauthorized medical personnel responding to a military casualty. She stared at him. He filed a complaint while I was on the helicopter. His office manager did, on his behalf. Apparently, Dr. Voss placed a call to the hospital's legal department from his cell phone while we were on the roof. She sat with that for a moment. That was fast, she said. It was. Bowen's expression was neutral. It was also recorded. She looked at him more carefully. What does that mean? It means that the hospital's phone system records all outgoing calls from administrative lines and physician office lines, and that the complaint went through channels that are, as of approximately 20 minutes ago, under review by people who have both the authority and the interest to review them. What people? He didn't answer the question directly, which she was becoming familiar with again, the rhythm of a conversation with Bowen in which the direct answer lived somewhere adjacent to what he actually said. There's someone coming, he said instead. You should probably sit here and drink some water. I don't have any water. He stood up, disappeared for approximately 90 seconds, came back with 2 bottles of water from a vending machine down the hall, sat back down, handed her one. She opened it, drank. The chair was still too rigid, the TV was still muted. Bowen, she said. Look at me. He looked. What is coming? She said. He held her gaze for a moment. Something in his face, that same thing she'd seen at the nurse's station, the relief that wasn't quite relief, the thing that traveled under his default expression like a current under ice. Something that should have come a long time ago, he said. Before she could respond, her phone, which she didn't have, wasn't what rang. It was the pager clipped to Bowen's vest. He looked at it, looked at her. Hartwell, he said. She was already standing. They walked fast, not running. Running in hospital corridors meant something had already gone wrong that couldn't be fixed, and Emily had learned early to reserve it for those moments. Bowen kept pace beside her, his hand not touching her elbow, but close enough that she felt the proximity of it, the unspoken offer. The OR waiting desk was a small station outside the surgical suite corridor, staffed by a woman named Phyllis, who had been doing this job for probably 25 years, and had the particular composure of someone who had delivered every variety of news to every variety of person, and had made peace with the weight of it. Phyllis looked up. You're with the military patient? Yes, Bowen said. Dr. Hartwell asked me to let you know he's out of immediate danger. She got control of the bleed. He's still on the table. She's doing a secondary survey and packing, but his pressure responded, and she's optimistic. Emily stood there and let the information settle. Optimistic, she said. Not a question. Her word. Okay. She put one hand on the edge of the desk, not leaning, just steadying. Thank you. She turned away from the desk before Phyllis could see whatever was happening in her face, which was nothing dramatic, just the specific private reaction of someone who has held a great deal of tension in a very short period of time and has just been given permission to release a fraction of it. Bowen said nothing. He was good at that. She walked to the window at the end of the surgical corridor. It looked out over the hospital's rear parking lot, a view of no particular distinction, a few trees, a service road, the back end of the hospital's laundry building. And she stood there for a moment. He's going to need a second look lap in 48 hours, she said. Hartwell will know that. Make sure someone with authority tells her she has whatever she needs for his recovery. No red tape, no insurance authorization delays. He needs to be here as long as he needs to be here. I'll make the call. Tonight. Emily. His voice carried a mild note of patience. I'll make the call tonight. She nodded, still looking at the parking lot. I need my bag, she said, and my phone. And I need to figure out where I'm sleeping because I gave up the apartment 3 weeks ago and I was planning to start at a travel nursing position in... She stopped. That's not your problem. We can arrange... I'll sort it. She turned from the window. What's happening with Voss? The shift in his expression was small, careful. Why do you ask it like that? Because you said something was coming, and then the pager went off, and we moved before you finished the thought. She looked at him steadily. What's coming, Bowen? He reached into the chest pocket of his vest, the left one. She remembered he kept non-tactical items on the left, and pulled out his phone, scrolled, turned the screen toward her. It was an email. Official letterhead she recognized, Not military, but adjacent to it. The kind of institutional stationery that carries the particular authority of organizations that don't need to announce themselves. She read it. Didn't take long. "When did this come through?" she said. "About an hour before we reached you this morning. That's actually what accelerated the timeline on finding you. We'd been trying to do it through official channels, nice and quiet, but when this landed, we had to move." She handed the phone back, looked at the corridor, the OR doors at the far end, the desk where Phyllis was now on the telephone, the overhead lights that hummed very faintly at a frequency you stopped hearing after the first week but never entirely forgot. "They're coming here," she said. "They're already in the city. They were in the air before we reached you." "How many?" "2, with a small support team. They wanted to make sure this was handled correctly." She absorbed that. "Boss doesn't know." "No. Administration doesn't know." "They're about to." She looked at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, but not quite satisfaction, not quite dread, a compound emotion that didn't have a clean name. "Is there anything I'm supposed to do between now and then?" "Sit somewhere that isn't here, drink the rest of that water, and try to eat something if you can manage it. You've been running on adrenaline since approximately 9 this morning, and it's now past noon." She looked down at the water bottle in her hand, which she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there, still half full. "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't say you weren't." She drank some water, mostly to give her hands something to do. The hospital's second floor had a staff lounge that Emily had used maybe 4 times in 4 years. It had a row of windows overlooking the hospital's main entrance, a vending machine with indifferent sandwiches, a coffee maker that worked about 60% of the time, and a small couch that someone had brought in at some point without authorization, and that had simply remained because removing it would have required a conversation nobody wanted to have. She sat on the couch. Bowen sat in one of the chairs across from her, making calls in a low voice, his back partially turned. Santos had appeared at some point and was standing near the door with the stillness of someone accustomed to long waits in small spaces. Emily ate half a vending machine sandwich, turkey on something that aspired to be sourdough, and thought about nothing for approximately 90 seconds, which was as long as she could sustain it before her mind started moving again. She thought about Marcus Webb, who had been right about the dressing change and had looked like he was going to be sick when Voss turned on him. She thought about Damaris, who had taken her patients without being asked. She thought about Tobias, who had immediately started moving toward her locker when she'd asked, who hadn't hesitated. She thought about the 43 people who had been in the department this morning, and how many of them had looked at the floor. She wasn't angry about it exactly. She understood it. The calculus of staying quiet when someone with power is being cruel to someone else is not a comfortable one, but it's a real one, and most people make the choice that protects them, which is not the same as making the wrong choice, though it lives somewhere close to it. The door to the lounge opened. It was Renata Hartwell. She was still in her surgical cap, the kind of pale green that turns almost gray under fluorescent light, her mask pulled down below her chin. She had the look of someone who had been running at high intensity for 90 minutes and had just stepped down from it. That particular flatness that comes after sustained concentration, when the mind is still very sharp but has burned through its emergency fuel. "He's in recovery," she said. "Stable. His pressure held through closure." Emily let out a breath. "Second look at 48 hours? Already scheduled." Hartwell came into the room, poured herself a cup of coffee from the maker, looked at it as if she wasn't certain she trusted it, drank it anyway. "He had a grade 3 laceration on the right hepatic lobe. I packed it, put in a drain, we'll go back in when he's more stable and assess." A pause. "Whoever did the field stabilization gave him a fighting chance. The fluid management was textbook." "Okafor, their medic." "Good medic." "Yes." Hartwell lowered the cup, looked at Emily with the direct, unsentimental gaze of someone who did not have time in her professional life for anything less than directness. "I've been here 11 years, she said. "I know what happened this morning in the ED. I was in a procedure when it started, but the whole hospital knows by now." Emily said nothing. "The way you managed Kwan's resuscitation on that stretcher," Hartwell paused, choosing words, That wasn't nursing school training. That wasn't even ICU nursing training. No, Emily said simply. How long were you in? 8 years active, 2 reserve. Hartwell absorbed that. Combat deployments? 4. Theater? Emily looked at her. I can't. Right. Hartwell set down the cup. Right. Sorry, I don't know why I asked that. She stood there for a moment with the slightly unmoored quality of someone who has had their understanding of a situation significantly revised and is recalibrating. Voss had no idea. No. Nobody here knew. That was the point. Hartwell looked at her for another moment. Then, with the quiet decisiveness that Emily had recognized in her immediately, she said, For what it's worth, and I know it doesn't fix this morning, you can work in my OR anytime. Not as a nurse, as a colleague. Emily looked at her, felt something move in her chest, small and complicated. Thank you, she said, and meant it. Hartwell left. Bowen, who had finished his calls, sat quietly. That was something, he said. Don't. I'm not making it into anything. I'm just noting. Emily leaned her head back against the couch, stared at the ceiling. The lights hummed. Her eyes were starting to feel the morning. She closed them, just for a second, and that was when they heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just the distinct change in ambient noise from the hallway that happens when something significant enters a space. Voices dropping, movement adjusting, the particular acoustic signature of an environment responding to an authority it recognizes. She opened her eyes. Bowen was already on his feet, phone to his ear, listening to something. His expression did the thing it did, reorganized itself from neutral into something more formal, more careful. They're in the lobby, he said. Emily stood up, ran one hand over her hair, still up from shift, still holding, barely, and looked down at herself. Scrubs, vending machine turkey on her breath. No badge, no ID. You look fine. I look like I just came off a 12-hour shift and then flew in a Blackhawk. That's because you did. He was already moving toward the door. Come on. The lobby of Redstone Regional Hospital was a 2-story atrium with a reception desk, a row of chairs along the windows, and a cafe kiosk that closed at 2 p.m. It was the kind of lobby designed to project reassurance. Light wood tones, live plants, watercolor prints of local landscapes. It was not designed for what was currently occupying it. Emily came through the stairwell door into the lobby and stopped. There were 2 vehicles outside the main entrance, visible through the glass, dark SUVs, government plates, the kind that park wherever they need to, and nobody argues about it. Inside, near the reception desk, stood 2 men in uniform. One was a full colonel. She read the insignia automatically, the way you never really stopped reading insignia. The other was taller, older, with the silver star insignia of a major general and the bearing of someone who had spent so many years being the most senior person in a room that they'd stopped noticing it. She knew him. Not personally, not well. They'd met twice, both times in operational contexts where there had been no time for introductions to mean anything beyond the immediate situation. But she knew who he was. Everyone who'd served in the theaters she'd served in knew who Major General Douglas Whitmore was. He turned from the reception desk and saw her. And Whitmore, who Emily had once watched remain composed while a forward operating base took indirect fire for 40 minutes, who she had seen make a dozen decisions in a row under conditions that would have paralyzed most people, stopped completely still. Then he crossed the lobby toward her. He was 61 or 62, she thought. The gray was complete now, where it had been partial when she'd last seen him. He moved with the slight stiffness of someone whose knees had taken years of hard use and were now sending consistent invoices about it. His face was weathered in the way that faces weather when the sun and wind have had them for decades. He stopped 2 feet from her. She expected an introduction, a formal greeting, the official language of a military officer conducting official business. Instead, he said quietly, "I'm sorry it took us this long to find you." She opened her mouth, closed it. There was something in his voice she hadn't prepared for. "Sir, I mean it." He was looking at her steadily. "You should never have had to disappear. That's on us." A pause. "I'm on us. She looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. General Whitmore, what exactly are you here to do? He straightened slightly. The official register coming back in, not because he was hiding behind it, but because he'd heard her ask a direct question, and he was a man who answered direct questions directly. Several things, he said, the first of which involves the administration of this hospital. He glanced toward the reception desk, where a woman Emily recognized as the hospital's director of operations, Linda Farber, was standing with the expression of someone who had received a phone call 20 minutes ago that had made no sense and was now looking at the reason why. We've requested an immediate meeting with hospital leadership. All of them? Emily said. All of them that are currently in the building. He looked at her, including Dr. Voss. Emily felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. Not metaphorically, actually. The air pressure of a space changes when enough people in it simultaneously realize that the situation is different from what they thought it was. Bowen appeared at her elbow. He'd been making another call, she realized, coordinating the arrival, managing the pieces. Sir, he said to Whitmore, conference room is available on the 3rd floor. Administration has been notified. Whitmore nodded once, looked at Emily. Will you be joining us? He asked. There was something careful in the way he asked it. Careful meaning he was giving her the choice, which itself was its own answer, because people who ask whether you'll join them when they already have the authority to require your presence are doing something that isn't about authority at all. She thought about Harlan Voss, who was somewhere in this building right now, who had called her just a nurse in front of 43 people and then filed a complaint from his cell phone while she was on a helicopter trying to keep a man alive. She thought about Marcus Webb and Damaris and Tobias. She thought about the manila envelope in the back of her closet, behind the winter coats. Yes, she said. They moved toward the elevator bank, Whitmore and the Colonel, Bowen, Santos, Emily, in her scrubs with the half-empty water bottle she was apparently still carrying. The lobby had gone very quiet. The receptionist wasn't pretending to work anymore. The couple waiting near the window had stopped their conversation. The orderly near the cafe kiosk was standing absolutely still. As the elevator doors opened, Emily heard a voice behind her. Emily. She turned. It was Linda Farber, the operations director, a woman in her mid-50s who ran the administrative side of Redstone Regional with the meticulous precision of someone who had once been an accountant and never entirely stopped being one. She had the look of someone who had been holding herself together with considerable effort since the moment the black SUVs had pulled up outside. What is this? Farber asked. Her voice was controlled, professional, but underneath it was something else. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling a person gets when the ground they thought was solid turns out to have significant questions about its own structural integrity. Emily looked at her. I think, Emily said quietly, that you're about to find out. The elevator doors closed. On the 3rd floor, in the hospital's main conference room, Harlan Voss was already seated at the table, his hands folded in front of him, his expression arranged into something confident that was working very hard at it. Beside him sat the hospital's CEO, Richard Arlen, who had been reached on the golf course and had arrived with his tie slightly off-center. The door opened. Voss looked up, saw the uniform, saw the insignia, and something happened in his face that Emily watched with the specific attention she gave to things that were important to understand accurately. His certainty, the thing that had lived in his expression like a permanent resident since the moment she'd met him, faltered. Not disappeared. Not yet. But faltered. Whitmore entered the room and did not sit. He stood at the head of the table, and the colonel took a position to his right, and Bowen closed the door, and the room held 7 people, and the weight of a morning that had been building toward this since the moment those ambulance bay doors blew open. Whitmore looked at Voss. Dr. Voss, he said, my name is Major General Douglas Whitmore, and I've been waiting to have this conversation since 7:43 this morning. He reached into the briefcase the colonel had set on the table, and he placed a folder in the center, then a tablet displaying security footage, then a printed copy of the phone call log from Voss's office extension. Voss looked at the items on the table, looked at Whitmore, looked at Emily standing near the door in her scrubs. I don't, he started. Dr. Voss, Whitmore said, I'm going to ask you to listen very carefully. Because what I'm about to tell you about the woman you had escorted out of your emergency department this morning is going to significantly change the nature of this conversation. The room was absolutely silent, and Emily stood there and didn't say anything and didn't need to, because the truth, the real truth, the one she'd packed into a manila envelope and put behind her winter coats, was already in the room, and it had arrived wearing a general's insignia and carrying documentation, and it was only just getting started. Whitmore opened the folder without preamble. The first page was a personnel file, her personnel file, and even from across the table Emily could see the header, the photograph taken when she was 23 years old and had just finished her first deployment, looking into the camera with the particular expression of someone who has seen enough to know that photographs lie. Emily Marie Carter, Whitmore said, commissioned as a nurse officer in the United States Army at 22. Advanced trauma nursing training at Fort Sam, Houston. Deployed 4 times across 3 theaters of operation. Recipient of the Bronze Star with Valor Device, the Army Commendation Medal with Valor Device, and the Combat Medical Badge. He paused. Not for effect. Whitmore didn't do things for effect. He paused because the next part required a different register. She was the lead trauma nurse on 17 classified combat surgical operations. 8 of those missions were subsequently cited in after-action reviews as examples of best practice battlefield medicine. She developed a tourniquet and pack protocol for penetrating abdominal trauma in austere environments that is currently standard procedure in 4 special operations units. The room held very still. Richard Arlen, the CEO, had stopped looking like a man who'd been interrupted on a golf course and started looking like a man doing rapid and uncomfortable arithmetic. His eyes moved from Whitmore to Emily and back to the folder with the expression of someone realizing that the number they've been calculating is very different from the number they expected. Voss had not moved. His hands were still folded on the table in front of him, but his knuckles had changed color. She left active service 3 years ago, Whitmore continued, and transitioned to civilian nursing under circumstances that were her choice, fully supported, and private. He looked up from the folder. We respected that privacy until this morning, when a situation arose that required her specific expertise, and when we arrived to request her assistance, we found her being physically escorted from the building by security at your direction. Arlen cleared his throat. General Whitmore, I want to be clear that I wasn't aware of the specific... Mr. Arlen, I'm not finished. Arlen closed his mouth. Whitmore placed his hand on the tablet. The screen showed 2 windows. The left was security footage from the ED, time-stamped 9:17 a.m., showing Voss standing over Marcus Webb with an expression that read clearly, even in surveillance resolution. The right window showed footage from 11:40, the nurse's station, Voss talking, and Emily standing very still with her hands at her sides. Your hospital's security system retains 72 hours of footage from all clinical areas, Whitmore said. We've already been in contact with your IT security director, who has confirmed the footage and flagged it for preservation. He picked up the printed phone log. This is the record of a call made from Dr. Voss's office extension at 12:07 p.m. today. A complaint filed with hospital legal alleging unauthorized medical personnel conducting procedures without privileges. He set it down. That call was made while Ms. Carter was aboard a military aircraft performing emergency stabilization on a critically wounded service member. The silence in the room had texture now, the kind that presses on the ears. Voss unfolded his hands, refolded them. I didn't know who she was, he said. His voice was controlled. She'd give him that. I made a judgment call based on the information available to me. Dr. Voss. It was the colonel speaking for the first time. He had a clipped, precise way of speaking that suggested someone who had attended a great many briefings and given a great many more. The information available to you included a nurse with a 4-year employment record at this facility, no documented performance issues, and a correct clinical intervention that your own behavior directly contradicted. Her identity is not the point. Voss looked at the colonel. Then what is the point? The point, Whitmore said, is what the next 48 hours look like for this institution. He sat down then, deliberately, the way senior officers sit when they want a room to understand that what's coming is not a performance but a reckoning. Emily had not moved from her position near the door. She was watching Voss.
not with satisfaction, not with anger. Those were too simple, too clean. What she felt watching him was something more complicated, the particular compound emotion of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and can feel the balance beginning to shift, which is not relief exactly, but is related to it. Arlen spoke carefully. "What is it that you're looking for from this meeting, General?" "Several things. First, Ms. Carter's immediate reinstatement to her position with documentation confirming the termination was improper and without cause." Whitmore looked at Arlen directly. "Second, a full review of this morning's events by your patient safety committee, with the security footage as primary documentation. Third, we'll be requesting access to Ms. Carter's employment file, her performance reviews, and any prior HR complaints she may have filed that were not acted upon." Arlen's expression shifted. "That last request would require a federal records request, yes, which has been prepared."
The colonel placed another document on the table. "It's already in process." There was a pause. Then Voss said something that Emily would think about later, in the way you think about the specific moment when a person reveals the true architecture of who they are. "She's been here 4 years," he said, "and nobody knew. She hid it. That's not something an honest person does." The room went very quiet in a different way. Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped in volume, which paradoxically made it more present in the room, not less. "She had the right," he said, "to come home and be a nurse. That's all she wanted to do, and you made it impossible for her to do that quietly. So here we are." Emily felt something move through her at that. Not tears, nothing so convenient, just a shift behind the sternum, the feeling of something that had been held rigidly in place for a long time relaxing slightly, like a fist opening. Voss looked at her. She looked back. He looked away first. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes, during which Arlen agreed to all 3 of Whitmore's conditions in writing. The colonel had a laptop, and said things like, "We take this very seriously," and "This does not reflect our values as an institution," in the way that administrators say those things, which is simultaneously sincere and insufficient, and all that's available in a conference room on a Thursday afternoon. Emily contributed 4 sentences total to the meeting. All of them were direct answers to direct questions. She did not perform a motion for the room. She did not make it easier for anyone. Afterward, in the corridor, Whitmore walked beside her toward the elevator. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said, which was more honest than she'd intended. "That's a fair answer." They reached the elevator. She pressed the button. "General, what happens now? To Kwan's team, to the mission status? That's being handled separately, and you don't need to carry it." "I know. I'm asking anyway." He looked at her with the slight smile of someone who has learned not to be surprised by a particular person's persistence. "The team is secure. The mission is closed. Kwan will recover." A pause. "And there will be additional steps regarding this morning and your service record that we'd like to discuss with you when you're ready. Not today." "What kind of steps?" "The kind that make what happened in that conference room today the beginning of a resolution, not the end of one." She thought about that. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. "I need to check on Kwan," she said. "Of course." "And I need to find somewhere to sleep. We've arranged." "I'll sort it," she said. He looked at her. "You're going to keep saying that." "Probably." Kwan was in the surgical ICU by 4 p.m., sedated, vitals stable, with a drain output that was within acceptable range and a blood pressure that had climbed back to 108 systolic and was holding. Emily stood at the glass partition outside his room for approximately 3 minutes. She didn't go in. The ICU nurse was managing his care and didn't need someone standing at his bedside generating questions. But she stood there long enough to look at the monitor numbers and read the nursing notes on the whiteboard visible through the window and satisfy herself that what she'd done on that helicopter had been enough. It had been enough. It wasn't perfect. Nothing field-initiated ever was. But it had been enough. She turned away from the glass and nearly walked directly into Marcus Webb. He was in scrubs, off the floor apparently. He had a bag over one shoulder and looked like he was heading out for the day. He stopped when he saw her, and his face did several things in rapid succession that he clearly couldn't control. "Emily," he said. I didn't know about your background. Nobody was supposed to, she said. Marcus, this morning, what he did to you was wrong. What he said was wrong. That had nothing to do with you being right about the dressing change, which you were. Marcus looked at the floor. I didn't say anything when he went after you. I know. I should have. Yeah, she said, not unkindly, just truthfully. But I know why you didn't. He looked up. His eyes were slightly too bright, the look of someone who has been holding something uncomfortable in a confined space for several hours. Is Voss going to... I don't know yet what's going to happen, she said. But there are people in this building right now asking questions that are going to produce answers, and those answers are going to matter. She paused. Do you have anything documented? Any prior incidents? I made a note in my personal records after a situation in February. Marcus stopped. He falsified a consultation order. I documented it, and then nothing happened, so I stopped keeping records because it felt like screaming into a wall. Emily looked at him. Do you still have the February notes? Yes. Keep them, she said. And if anyone from hospital administration or a federal review process contacts you, answer honestly. Marcus nodded. Once firmly, the nod of someone making a decision rather than acknowledging information. She left him in the corridor and took the stairs to the main floor. The ED was different by 5 p.m. She felt it the moment she pushed through the doors. The particular change in atmosphere that happens in a department when something significant has occurred and everyone is processing it in real time, while also continuing to do their jobs, which is the only option available to people in emergency medicine. Damaris was still there. Still there, Emily noted, past the end of what had been a long shift, and she looked up from a chart when Emily came through. Polk got moved to the ICU, Damaris said immediately. Confirmed sepsis, source is likely biliary, ID is on board, they've got him on Piptazo, pressors are weaned. A pause. He's going to be okay. Emily felt a small, specific loosening in her chest. Good catch on the escalation. I just followed your read. Damaris set the chart down and looked at her with a directness that Emily had always respected in her. What's happening on the third floor? Because the whole building is... Administration is meeting with federal representatives, Emily said. There's going to be a review. Of Voss. Of several things. Damaris was quiet for a moment, then, how many years did you serve? 8 active, 2 reserve. And you just came here and worked as a floor nurse. ER nurse, Emily said, slight correction. Emily. Damaris. A beat. I'm glad you're okay, Damaris said. That's the whole sentence. Emily looked at her for a moment. Thank you for taking my patients today. Come back tomorrow. We're short. Emily almost smiled. I'll think about it. She was heading back toward the nursing station to retrieve her badge when she heard the commotion from the direction of the main lobby. Not loud, not shouting, nothing that violated the ambient professional register of a hospital, but the specific kind of accelerated movement and voice dropping that happens when something unexpected has arrived. She turned. 2 men in suits she didn't recognize were at the reception desk. Not military. The suits were wrong for military, and so were the shoes, the particular solid, unremarkable footwear of people who spend a lot of time standing in institutional settings. One of them was holding a credential wallet open for the receptionist, who was looking at it with the expression of someone reading a language they don't entirely speak. Bowen appeared from the direction of the elevator bank, and Emily watched him cross the lobby toward the 2 men and stop, and the 3 of them spoke in low voices for approximately 15 seconds, and then Bowen turned and looked across the lobby and found her. His expression was not alarmed. It was something else. Careful, measured. The face of someone who has been expecting a specific development and is now calibrating exactly how to communicate it. He crossed to her. Who are they? She asked. Office of Inspector General, he said. They've been working a parallel track. He paused. Emily, what they have goes beyond this morning. She looked at him. What does that mean? They've been investigating Redstone Regional for 8 months. Patient negligence complaints, insurance billing irregularities, A falsified incident report from last spring. He glanced toward the two men, who were now being directed toward the elevator by the receptionist. What happened to you today accelerated their timeline. They were planning to move in 3 weeks. They're moving now. She absorbed this. How much do they have? Enough, he said, that the conversation on the 3rd floor is about to get significantly more complicated. She looked at the elevator. The doors were closing behind the IG investigators. She thought about the conference room 3 floors up, where Arlen was presumably still signing documents and saying things like, "This does not reflect our values," and imagined the specific moment those two men walked through the door. "Voss is still up there?" she asked. "As of 10 minutes ago." She looked at Bowen. "Is there anything I need to do right now?" "No," he said. "This part moves on its own." She nodded, started to turn away. "Emily," she stopped. "There's one more thing," Bowen said, and his voice had the careful quality of someone delivering information they've been holding back because the timing needed to be right. "The IG's records request, the one they've been building for 8 months, includes the hospital's HR files." He paused. "All of them, including the 4 complaints you filed in your first 2 years here that were closed without action." She went very still. She had filed those complaints quietly, formally, through the proper channels, because that was what you did. Because she had believed, or had made herself believe, that the proper channels existed for a reason. The first one was about a medication error that had been covered over with a chart amendment. The second was about a patient restraint that had been improperly documented. The third and fourth were about Voss, specifically about a pattern of behavior in the ED that she had documented with dates and specific language and submitted to HR in an envelope that had disappeared into institutional silence. She had not told anyone about those complaints. "How did they know?" she asked. "Someone in HR came forward 6 months ago," Bowen said, "anonymously. They provided a list of complaints that had been routed to administration and never actioned." He held her gaze. "Yours were on the list." She stood there in the lobby of Redstone Regional Hospital and felt something turn over in her chest. The specific sensation of realizing that the quiet, invisible work you did when you believed no one was watching had, in fact, been witnessed. "Who?" she said. "We don't know. The source has remained anonymous." She looked at the elevator doors. The numbers were climbing. The investigators were on their way up. She thought about the conference room, about Arlen's carefully neutral face, and Voss's refolded hands, and the security footage running on loop on the tablet in the middle of the table. "They're going to walk in up there," she said, "right in the middle of—" "Yes," Bowen said. "Voss doesn't know the IG has been building a case." "No." She thought about the look on his face when Whitmore had placed the folder on the table. The faltering of his certainty, partial, still defended, the expression of a man who believed this was a problem that could be managed. He didn't know yet that management wasn't an option. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She'd retrieved it from her locker 20 minutes ago. She looked at the screen. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. 8 words. "Security footage from Base 6. You need to see this." She looked at Bowen. He hadn't seen the message. He was looking toward the lobby entrance, tracking something. She turned the phone so he couldn't read the screen. She didn't know who had sent it. She didn't know what was on the footage from Base 6, the room where the morning had actually started, where Voss had stood over Marcus Webb and said things that 43 people had heard and nobody had initially moved to stop. But she knew that Base 6 had a camera, and she knew that she had been standing in the doorway. And she had the very specific, very certain feeling, the feeling she'd learned to trust in environments where trusting it was the difference between coming home and not, that whatever was on that footage was not going to help Harlan Voss. She typed back, "Where are you?" 3 seconds. Nurse's station. Base 6 monitor. Come alone. She put the phone in her pocket. "I need to check something," she told Bowen. "What?" "I'll be back in 5 minutes." He looked at her. "Emily." 5 minutes, Bowen." She was already moving. The nurse's station was quiet at this hour. Shift change had happened. The evening crew settling in, the day staff filtering out in 1s and 2s with the particular exhausted relief of people who had survived something unusual. The Base 6 monitor was a wall-mounted screen at the far end of the station, used primarily for reviewing camera feeds when incident documentation required it. Tobias was standing in front of it. Emily had not expected Tobias. He was 23, maybe 24, with the build of someone who'd been athletic in high school and hadn't quite decided what to do with that since. And he was standing in front of the monitor with his arms crossed and the expression of someone who has made a decision and is waiting to find out if it was the right one. "You sent the text," she said. "I have a second phone," he said. "Personal. I didn't want it traced back to the station line." She looked at him. "Tobias, what's on the footage?" He uncrossed his arms and reached past her to the monitor's input panel, pulling up the archived feed from Bay 6. He'd already queued it. The timestamp read 9:04 a.m., 13 minutes before the incident Emily had walked in on. "Watch," he said. The footage was the standard overhead angle of a hospital security camera. Slightly wide, slightly washed out, the compression artifacts of a system built for storage efficiency rather than image quality. But it was clear enough. Bay 6. The patient, Loretta Sims, visible in the bed. Marcus, charting at the bedside terminal. And then, at 9:06, a man entering the frame who was not Voss. Emily leaned toward the screen. The man was in scrubs, not physician scrubs, the darker shade of the surgical team, and he went directly to Loretta Sims' IV pole. He made an adjustment, small, quick, the practiced motion of someone who had done this before and knew exactly how long it took. "Who is that?" Emily said. "His name is Brett Callan. He's a surgical PA, works directly under Voss." Tobias's voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "He's been on Voss's service for 3 years. What did he adjust?" "The rate on her secondary line." Tobias advanced the footage. "Watch the nursing notes from 9:10. He pulled up a split screen to the footage on the left, a scrolling medical record on the right. At 9:10, a nursing note appeared, time-stamped and signed by Marcus Webb, documenting the patient's current IV rate and dressing status. The rate in the note matched the pre-adjustment rate, not the current one. "Marcus didn't see him change it," Emily said. Marcus was charting with his back to the pole. He documented what the rate had been when he last checked it, which was accurate at the time. Tobias pointed to the screen. But Callan changed it after Marcus's assessment and before Voss came in. Emily straightened. Her mind was running the clinical sequence, a changed IV rate on a post-surgical patient, followed by a physician arriving and finding an issue with the patient's fluid balance or wound presentation, followed by a nurse being blamed for an anomaly that the nurse hadn't created. Voss came in knowing what he'd find, she said. "I think Callan did it because Voss told him to." Tobias lowered his voice slightly, though there was no one close enough to hear. "This isn't the first time. I've been unit secretary for 2 years. I see the charts. I see the flow. Twice before, nurses got written up for patient status issues that didn't track with the prior shift documentation." He paused. "I didn't put it together until today, when I saw what happened to you and then went back to pull the Bay 6 feed for the incident report." Emily looked at him. He was not comfortable. His eyes had the slight brightness of someone who hadn't fully processed yet what it meant to be standing where he was standing. But he was here. He'd pulled the footage, sent the text, waited. "You know what this means," she said. "Yeah. It means this isn't about me. It's not even about Marcus. This is a pattern." "Yeah," he said again. "I know." She thought about Loretta Sims, who had been lying in that bed with the rigid posture of someone trying to appear unbothered, while a physician made her responsible for something she hadn't caused. She thought about the 2 HR complaints she'd filed in her second year, a medication anomaly, a documentation irregularity, both of which she'd flagged because they hadn't felt right, hadn't tracked, had the particular texture of things that had been arranged rather than occurred. "I need to make a call," she said. "Don't go anywhere." She stepped 6 feet away from the station, pulled out her phone, and called Bowen. He picked up before the second ring. "Where are you?" "Nurses Station, Main ED, Bowen, the IG investigators. Are they still in the conference room?" "Yes. Why?" "Tell them to stay there. Tell them I'm coming up in 10 minutes with something they need to see." She looked back at Tobias, who was watching her. And tell them to pull Loretta Sims's chart. Post-surgical patient Bay 6 admitted yesterday. A pause. What am I telling them they're looking for? A pattern, she said. That's been running a lot longer than 8 months. Talk. She brought Tobias with her. The conference room on the 3rd floor had reorganized itself in her absence. Whitmore and the colonel were still present, but they'd shifted to one end of the table, making room, she understood, for the 2 IG investigators who had introduced themselves as Agent Price and Agent Nakamura, and who had the patient, slightly tired energy of people who had been building a case for a long time and were now in the phase where the building started paying off. Arlen was there. He looked worse than he had an hour ago. Voss was not. Emily noticed that immediately. Where's Voss? Price, the taller one, gray at the temples, the kind of face that gave away nothing as a matter of professional discipline, looked up from his laptop. Dr. Voss indicated he needed to consult with legal counsel and stepped out approximately 12 minutes ago. Was he allowed to leave the building? He's not under arrest, Price said, at this juncture. Emily set Tobias's phone on the table. She'd had him airdrop the footage to it. This is security footage from Base 6, time-stamped this morning at 9:06 a.m. I need you to watch approximately 4 minutes of it. Nobody said anything. Price turned the phone toward him and Nakamura, and they watched. Emily watched them watch it, the slight tightening around Price's eyes at the IV adjustment. Nakamura making a note without looking down at his notepad. The reflexive efficiency of someone who has trained themselves to write without breaking their visual attention. When it finished, Price looked up at Tobias. Who are you? Tobias Reyes, Unit Secretary, Emergency Department. I've been here 2 years. You pulled this footage yourself? Yes, sir. When I was compiling the incident report for this morning's events. The Base 6 feed is archived on the same system. He reached into the folder he was carrying. Emily hadn't noticed the folder, but Tobias, she was revising upward her assessment of significantly, had come prepared, and placed 3 printed pages on the table. These are the nursing documentation records from 3 prior incidents in the last 14 months. 2 involving nurses who subsequently received formal write-ups. 1 involving a patient complaint that was resolved in the hospital's favor. He'd stapled each set separately, small detail, the detail of someone who'd spent 2 years organizing other people's paperwork. In each case, the documentation anomaly follows the same pattern as what you just saw. The room was very quiet. Whitmore had not moved. He was watching Tobias with an expression that Emily recognized, the look of someone filing away a piece of information about a person that they intend to act on later. Arlen put his hand flat on the table. I need to be clear that I was not aware of any systematic... Mr. Arlen, Nakamura said, with the specific courtesy of someone who has heard this sentence many times. We'll get to your awareness level. Right now, I need you to not speak. Arlen folded his hands, looked at the table. Price looked at Emily. The PA in the footage, Callan. Do you know where he is? He should be on the surgical floor, Emily said. He works days, typically off by 6. Price made a call. Low, quick, professional. He said 3 sentences and hung up. Looked at Nakamura. Something passed between them that wasn't words. He clocked out at 4:52, Price said. Is that unusual? Nakamura asked, directing the question at Tobias. His shift ends at 5, Tobias said. He's usually here until 5:30 minimum. 8 minutes before Emily had sent Bowen the instruction to have the IG investigators pull Loretta Sims's chart. Someone had moved fast. She felt it before she had language for it. The particular prickling awareness of a situation that is still moving, still evolving, where the belief that the major pieces were in place had been premature. Voss called him, she said. Price was already on his phone again. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos of the specific kind that Emily had learned to navigate. Not the physical chaos of a trauma bay, but the administrative kind, which had its own rhythms and pressure points and moments where a wrong move closed off options irreversibly. Price put a federal hold on Callan's vehicle through channels that moved faster than Emily had expected, which told her the IG's case was further along than the 8-month timeline suggested. You didn't have those channels pre-warmed unless you'd been anticipating a moment like this. Nakamura pulled Loretta Sims's complete chart and compared it against the footage timestamps with a methodical efficiency that was almost meditative to watch. He made notes, he photographed pages, he didn't express anything about what he was finding, which itself was information. Arlen sat at the table with the look of a man watching a structure he'd believed was sound develop visible cracks in real time. He'd called his own legal counsel at some point, a woman named Ferris, who arrived at the conference room in a blazer and reading glasses and immediately began doing what lawyers do in these situations, which is create verbal buffer between their client and the people asking questions. Emily and Tobias sat against the wall, not at the table. She had requisitioned 2 cups of coffee from the 3rd-floor break room. Bad coffee, the kind that had been in the carafe since morning, but it was hot. And she drank hers and thought. She was thinking about the 4 complaints she'd filed, the ones that had gone into silence. She was thinking about whoever in the HR department had come forward anonymously 6 months ago with a list of suppressed complaints, had risked their position to hand that list to federal investigators, and had never identified themselves. She didn't know who it was. She thought she might never know. But the fact of them, the fact of someone sitting in an office with a list of names and deciding quietly to do something about it, sat in her chest with a weight she didn't have a category for. At 6:47 p.m., Brett Callan was located in the parking garage of a hotel 2 miles from the hospital. He had not checked in. He was sitting in his car with his phone in his hand. A federal agent from the IG's support team made the contact, and the call Price received 11 minutes later produced a change in his expression that was the first visible emotion she'd seen from him. "He's talking," Price said. Nakamura looked up from the chart. "Already?" His lawyer arrived, took 10 minutes with him, and then he started talking. Price put the phone face down on the table. Apparently, Dr. Voss has been directing him to make adjustments to patient care, medication rates, documentation entries, the framing of complications, for the purpose of creating records that protected Voss from liability in outcomes that had been affected by Voss's own errors. He paused. He has text messages. 11 months of them. The room absorbed that. Arlen's lawyer, Ferris, put her pen down and looked at her client with the expression of someone who has just recalculated her evening. "How many patients?" Nakamura asked. "He's given us 7 names so far," Price said. "He says there are more." Emily looked at the table in front of her. She thought about 7 patients. She thought about the particular helplessness of being sick and in a hospital and trusting the people around you to be what they said they were. And she felt something in her that was not satisfaction at Voss's unraveling and was not anger exactly, but was something cold and clear and firm, the emotion that exists on the other side of the long, patient act of having been right about something that nobody would listen to. She stood up. "I'm going to check on Quan." Price looked at her. "We may need you to provide a formal statement tonight." "I'll be in the surgical ICU." She picked up her coffee cup. "You know where to find me." Quan was awake. This was not what she had expected. Hartwell had projected sedation through at least midnight. But when Emily came through the SICU door at 7:15, the night nurse, a large man named Augusto, who had clearly been doing this job long enough to be unruffled by most things, looked up and said, "He's been asking for whoever flew in with him." She went to the room. Quan was not fully awake in any meaningful sense. His eyes were at half-mast. His words were going to be unreliable. The morphine drip was doing most of the management of his experience right now. But he turned his head when she came in, and something in his face changed. "Hey," he said. His voice was wrecked. The endotracheal tube had been in for hours, and his throat would be sore for days. "Hey," she said. She sat in the chair beside his bed. "You're in Brookhaven. You're at a civilian hospital. You're okay." "Okay," he repeated, like he was testing the word. "Your pressure's holding." Hartwell did good work. He was quiet for a moment. His hand on the bed rail shifted slightly. Not reaching, just moving. "Okafor said someone on the bird, a nurse." "That was me." He looked at her. His eyes were not entirely focused, but they were present. The look of someone working hard to stay in a conversation.
What's your name? Emily. Emily. He said it carefully. Thank you. She looked at him. 36 years old, tubes and lines, and the particular fragile look of a person whose body had spent the day at its absolute limit and was now doing the slow, serious work of coming back from the edge of it. You did the hard part, she said. You stayed. He almost smiled. Almost. Then his eyes closed and his breathing evened out, and she sat there for another few minutes in the quiet of the SICU, the monitor's soft rhythms, the ventilator in the next room cycling, Augusto's footsteps in the corridor, before she stood up and put the chair back where she'd found it. She was in the hallway outside when her phone rang. Bowen. They found Voss, he said. She stopped walking. Where was he? His office. He'd been there the whole time. He was on the phone with the hospital's malpractice insurance carrier when they knocked. A pause. He didn't answer the door initially. They knocked twice. And then? And then he opened it. She started walking again toward the elevator. Is he still there? He's in the conference room. He arrived with his personal attorney approximately 20 minutes ago. The IG had Callan's statement in hand by the time Voss sat down. She pressed the elevator button. How did he look? Bowen was quiet for a moment. Like a man who has just understood that the thing he was certain was manageable is not manageable. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. She didn't go to the conference room. There was nothing for her to do in the conference room that wasn't already being done by people whose job it was to do it. And she had spent years learning, in environments where this lesson was not optional, that the difference between being useful and being present for the sake of presence was something you had to decide consciously, and consciously was how she was trying to operate right now. She went to the nurse's locker room on the second floor, sat on the bench in front of her locker, opened the combination, the same one she'd used for 4 years, and took out her bag, which Tobias had finally retrieved from the roof access point, and left here with a note that just said your bag, with no other information, which she thought was a nearly perfect note. She changed out of the scrubs she'd been wearing since 6:45 that morning, put on jeans and a gray pullover from the bag, sat back down. Her hands were slightly unsteady. Not much. Not enough that anyone else would notice, but she noticed, because she'd spent years learning to track exactly where her body was at in high-stress situations, and this was where it was. The adrenaline cycle completing, the drop. She sat with it for a while. At 8:20, the conference room door on the third floor, Bassem, according to Bowen, who texted her, opened for the last time that evening. Voss's personal attorney had negotiated a voluntary appearance for formal questioning the following morning. Voss had been required to surrender his hospital ID and access credentials. He was not under arrest. Not yet. He walked out of the building through the main lobby. Emily was not there to see it. She was in the locker room, sitting on a bench, hands folded, thinking about a manila envelope in a closet in an apartment she no longer had, and about 8 years, and about the woman in the photograph at 23 who had looked at a camera with the expression of someone who had figured out the hard way that the world was larger and more specific and more demanding than she had previously understood. She was thinking about all of that when her phone buzzed. Not Bowen this time. A number she recognized. The hospital's main administrative line. She picked up. Ms. Carter? It was Linda Farber, the operations director. Her voice had shed its professional insulation, the careful distance she'd maintained in every prior interaction, and what was underneath it was something more human and less comfortable. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Arlen. He would like to meet with you tonight, if you're willing. About what? An apology, Farber said, and a formal offer of reinstatement. In writing tonight, if you're available. Emily sat with the phone against her ear. Through the locker room wall, she could hear the distant ambient sound of the hospital, an announcement over the PA system, the rolling of a supply cart, the specific institutional white noise of a place that never fully went quiet. She thought about what Bowen had said, something that should have come a long time ago. Tell Mr. Arlen I'll meet with him, she said, but I'm not accepting anything tonight. A pause. Can I ask why? Because I want to know the full scope of what the IG investigation finds before I make any decisions about my future here. She stood up, picked up her bag.
And because an apology that arrives at the same time as a legal strategy is not an apology, it's a calculation.
And Mr. Arlen is smart enough to know the difference. Silence on the line, then, I'll relay that. Thank you. She ended the call. She was heading for the door when it opened and Bowen came in, stopped when he saw her, registered the change of clothes, the bag on her shoulder. You're leaving, he said. I'm going to find somewhere to sleep. We arranged saw it. I know. I'll use it. She looked at him. What's the read on tomorrow? Formal IG questioning of Voss at 9 a.m. Callan's statement is being processed. They'll have a full document by morning. The 7 patient cases will go to the state medical board simultaneously. He paused. There's going to be press. The IG's public affairs office will release something. They have to, once formal questioning begins. They'll try to manage the framing, but these things move. How fast? 24 hours, maybe less. He held the door for her. Emily, the HR files. She looked at him. Nakamura went through them tonight. Your 4 complaints. He was watching her carefully. There were 9 others, from 7 different nurses and 2 physicians over a 6-year period, all routed through administration, all closed without action, all, he paused, signed off on by the same person. Arlen, she said. Not Arlen. His voice was very careful now. Linda Farber. Emily stood in the doorway. Farber, who had just called her. Farber, who had said the words on behalf of Mr. Arlen in the specific way of someone who has learned to position themselves behind other people when the ground gets uncertain. Farber, who had been operations director for 9 years, who had her hands on every administrative process in the building, who had the authority to close a complaint and the institutional cover to make sure it stayed closed. She wasn't acting alone, Emily said. No, Bowen said, but she was the mechanism. She knew what Voss was doing, and she buried the record of anyone who tried to stop it. He paused. She called you tonight because she's trying to control the narrative before the IG gets to her files. The apology, the reinstatement offer, that was not Arlen's idea. Emily thought about the phone call. Farber's voice stripped of its professional insulation, what she'd read as something human and uncomfortable. It was human and uncomfortable. It was also a move. When does the IG get to her files? She asked. They requested them at 7 p.m., Bowen said. IT is pulling them now. They'll have them by morning. Emily stood there for a moment longer. Then she walked through the door and into the corridor. She'd been called back into a fight she hadn't asked for, on a day she hadn't been ready for. And the fight was larger than she'd understood when it started, and it wasn't finished yet. But the shape of it was clear now. The structure of it was visible. And she knew, had known since the moment she'd stood at that nurse's station and watched Voss look through her like she wasn't there, exactly how this kind of fight ended when you were patient enough and honest enough and willing to stand in the room and let the record speak. She took the stairs down to the ground floor. At the bottom of the stairwell, just before the door to the main corridor, someone had taped a piece of paper to the wall, handwritten. She almost walked past it. She stopped and read it. We should have said something this morning. We're sorry. Ed, staff. Below the sentence were signatures. 11 of them. Damaris, Tobias, Marcus. 8 others she recognized from shift. She stood there and read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of her jeans and pushed through the door. Outside, the Brookhaven night was warm and slightly humid and smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. The hospital parking lot was lit in that particular orange-white of institutional lighting, and somewhere across the lot a car was idling, and the sound of the city, low, continuous, indifferent, moved around her like water. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a text from a number she'd never seen before, and it had no name attached, and it said 4 words. Check the pharmacy records. She looked at the text for a long moment, looked up at the hospital building, the lit windows on the upper floors, the dark windows below. She thought about 7 patient names, about 11 months of texts between Voss and Callan, about medication rates adjusted when backs were turned. She thought about what happened when you pulled on a thread that had been there for years, and the thing it was attached to was bigger than you had understood when you first reached for it. She went back inside. The pharmacy was on the ground floor, east wing, behind a set of doors that required badge access after 7 p.m. Emily's badge had been reinstated in the system. She'd confirmed that when she swiped into the locker room earlier, and the lock clicked open without resistance. The pharmacist on duty was a man named Gerald, who was somewhere north of 60, and had the specific unhurried energy of someone who has outlasted every crisis this building has produced and expects to outlast several more. He looked up when she came in, recognized her from 4 years of working the same building, and did not ask why she was there at 8:40 p.m. in civilian clothes. "I need to look at dispensing records," she said. "Specifically controlled substances. Post-surgical patients, last 14 months. Gerald looked at her for a moment. "IG investigators already requested the full pull about an hour ago. I've got the report queued." "Can I see it?" He turned the monitor toward her. She read fast. She'd always read fast. Her brain had been trained over years to extract critical information from dense documentation under time pressure, and that skill, like most of the others, had not atrophied. It took her 4 minutes to find it. The pattern was not in the controlled substances themselves. It was in the timing. Specific medications, analgesics, sedatives, one anticoagulant, dispensed to post-surgical patients at intervals that didn't correspond to the documented orders. The dispense records showed one thing. The administration records, when you laid them side by side, showed another. Small gaps. Minutes sometimes. Long enough for a rate to be adjusted, a dose to be given outside its charted window, a complication to be seeded. 7 patients, as Callan had said, but the pharmacy records suggested 11. She photographed the screen, sent the images to Price's number, which Bowen had given her, added a single line of text, 11 patients, not 7. Compare dispensing timestamps against administration records. Price responded in 40 seconds. "We see it. Thank you." She handed the monitor back to Gerald. "Thank you," she said. "Long day," Gerald said, not as a question. "Yes." "Go sleep somewhere," he said. She almost smiled. "Working on it." The room Bowen's people had arranged was at a hotel 4 blocks from the hospital. A standard room, nothing remarkable, the kind of place that existed to be functional and succeeded at exactly that. She showered for a long time, standing under water hot enough to work through the tension that had built up in her shoulders over the past 14 hours. And she thought about nothing with partial success. She slept for 6 hours and woke at 4:50 a.m. before her alarm, which was not surprising. She lay in the dark for a while. The ceiling was featureless. The room was quiet in the sealed, pressurized way of hotels, the outside world reduced to a distant low register. She thought about the 11 patients, about the years of it, the systematic, deliberate arrangement of harm, so carefully managed that it had looked like variance, like the ordinary statistical noise of medical outcomes, until you put the timestamps together and the picture emerged. She thought about the nurses who had noticed, who had documented, who had filed complaints that went into a drawer and stayed there. She thought about the patients who had never known, who had trusted the building, the institution, the people in it, the way you have to trust them when you're sick and frightened and don't have another option. That was the part that sat heaviest, not what had been done to her. That she could carry. She'd carried harder things and knew how. It was the 11 people, the 30 people if you extended it back further, which the IG almost certainly would, who had been made sicker or kept sick or put at risk because one man's errors needed covering and the institution around him chose the cover. She got up at 5:15, made the hotel coffee, which was bad in the specific way of hotel coffee, and drank it anyway, standing at the window looking at the pre-dawn street below. Her phone had 12 unread messages. She read them in order. Bowen. Callan's full statement processed. 14 months of directives from Voss. IG confirmed 11 patients. State Medical Board contacted. Price. Pharmacy records consistent with statement. Formal subpoena issued for Voss financial records at 6 p.m. Questioning begins 9 a.m. Nakamura. Farber's files pulled. Evidence of 9 suppressed complaints across 6 years. She'll be questioned separately at 11. Damaris. Polk is off pressers. Thought you'd want to know. That last one she read twice. Oh. At 9:03 a.m., in a conference room in the Federal Building 8 blocks from Redstone Regional, Harlan Voss sat across a table from Agents Price and Nakamura with his attorney beside him and answered questions for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Emily was not there. She was in the hospital because Arlen had called her personally at 7:30 to ask if she would come in, and she had gone in because there were things to be said and signed and settled, and avoiding them served nothing. She was not officially reinstated yet. The paperwork required a process, a real one, not a gesture. But Arlen had given her temporary access and asked her to meet with the Patient Safety Committee at 10 a.m. She'd met with them. She'd given them the pharmacy records, the timeline, the documentation she'd put together at Gerald's monitor the night before. She'd answered every question directly and without performance. And when they asked her why she hadn't escalated further after her complaints were closed, she said, "I did escalate twice, and then I watched it get buried, and I understood that the system that was supposed to receive my escalations was the same system that was managing the problem, and I ran out of channels." The committee chair, a woman named Dr. Yvonne Tate, who had the steady, thoughtful presence of someone who had spent years in exactly this kind of difficult institutional moment, wrote something down and said, "That should not have happened." "No," Emily said, "it shouldn't." "What would you need," Tate said carefully, "to be able to continue working here?" Emily looked at her. "A department that functions the way a department is supposed to function, where a correct clinical decision isn't a political act. We're committed to—" "I know what institutions commit to," Emily said. Not unkindly, just directly. "Show me the structure, not the commitment. Give me the protocol revisions in writing. Give me the complaint process with actual teeth. Give me a department where a nurse like Marcus Webb can make the right call without needing to be afraid of it." She paused. "Do that, and we'll have something to talk about." Tate looked at her for a moment. "Okay," she said. "That's fair, Sab." At 1:17 p.m., Linda Farber walked into the federal building for her 11 a.m. interview, which had been pushed twice at the request of her counsel. She came out 3 hours later and did not comment to the 2 local reporters who had materialized on the steps. The IG's Public Affairs Office had released a brief statement that morning, as Bowen had predicted, and the reporters had done what reporters do. At 4 p.m., the State Medical Board issued a temporary suspension of Harlan Voss's medical license pending investigation. The suspension was immediate and public record. Emily was in the surgical ICU with Quan when Bowen told her. Quan was sitting up. This was a significant development from the previous evening's half-consciousness, and he was eating something from a tray with the focused determination of a person whose body has informed him that it is owed a significant debt of calories. He still had lines in, would have the drain for several more days, was going to be here for at least 2 weeks. Hartwell had told him this morning with the particular straightforwardness she seemed to apply to everything, and Quan had said, "Okay," in the tone of a man who had survived worse scheduling issues. "License suspended," Bowen said quietly, in the doorway, where Quan couldn't hear. Emily nodded, looked through the glass at Quan, who had moved from the food to his phone and was texting someone with one thumb, scowling slightly at the screen. "Farber?" she asked. "Still in process. Her cooperation level," Bowen paused, "is apparently improving significantly now that she's seen the pharmacy records. She'll deal. Her attorney is dealing, yeah." Emily looked at Quan's monitor. Pressure 114/70, pulse 68. The reassuring green lines of a body doing the work of repair. "The 11 patients," she said. "Who's reaching out to them?" "The IG office has a victim notification process. They'll make contact within 48 hours. She nodded. It wasn't enough. Notification was never enough. There was no version of this that gave those people back what had been taken from them. But it was the beginning of a record that hadn't existed yesterday, and a record mattered, because a record meant it had been seen and named and could not be quietly unmade. Quan looked up through the glass and saw her. He raised one hand in a small wave. She raised hers back. On the third day, Harlan Voss was arrested. The charges were multiple: insurance fraud, falsification of medical records, and 4 counts of criminal patient endangerment based on the 11 cases the IG had documented, of which 4 had resulted in what the charging document described as preventable complications causing significant patient harm. His attorney had apparently believed until the moment the handcuffs appeared, that a negotiated resolution was available. It wasn't. Price had told Emily this later, not as a detail she was owed, but as information he thought she'd want, and she'd appreciated the directness of it. She was not outside the building when they walked him out. She had no interest in that image, in being present for it or consuming it the way people consume public humiliations, the spectacle of a fall. What she cared about was the documentation, the charges filed, the record created in a courthouse with a case number attached to it. That was permanent in a way that a moment never was. She heard about it the same way most of Brookhaven heard about it. The local news ran the story at 6 p.m., led with his name and the word arrested, and a photograph taken outside the federal building. And the hospital's communications office released a statement that evening acknowledging the charges and expressing support for the investigation. Arlen's statement was careful and institutional and said very little directly, which was exactly what statements like that did. Linda Farber resigned the following morning. The resignation was accepted. 3 other members of hospital administration, all of whom had been named in the IG's documentation as having received suppressed complaints and taken no action, were placed on administrative leave pending a separate internal review. 2 of them would not return. Marcus Webb was formally cleared of any improper nursing practice in the Bay 6 incident. The documentation of his correct clinical judgment was placed in his personnel file, specifically noted as such in writing by Dr. Yvonne Tate. Emily read that part of the summary twice. 9 days after the morning the ambulance bay doors blew open, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. She had been not picking up unknown numbers for 4 years with considerable discipline. She picked up. "Ms. Carter?" A woman's voice, formal but not stiff. "My name is Colonel Adriana Souza. I'm calling from the office of the Army Surgeon General. Do you have a few minutes?" She was standing in the parking lot of a grocery store. She had been buying coffee and a bag of the specific brand of granola bar she liked, which the hotel's vending machine did not carry. "Yes," she said. "We've been in contact with General Whitmore regarding your service record and the events of last week. He speaks of your work with considerable—" A brief pause, the pause of someone choosing words carefully. Emphasis. Emily leaned against the side of her truck. "What is this call about, Colonel?" "We're developing a national combat trauma training program. Civilian-military integration focused on building trauma nursing capacity that can function in austere and high-casualty environments. We've been looking for someone to lead the curriculum development and initial training cohorts." Another pause. "General Whitmore recommended you before we'd finished the sentence." Emily looked at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan 2 spaces over. A teenager was sitting on a curb eating something. A grocery cart was rolling very slowly toward a concrete barrier with the patient inevitability of grocery carts. "Where would it be based?" she said. "The program headquarters would be at Fort Calder, with training rotations at 4 civilian trauma centers. One of them is a regional hospital in Brookhaven." She was quiet for a moment. "You'd retain civilian status," Souza said. "This is not a return to active duty. It's a consulting and instructional role, compensated accordingly, with full institutional support." A pause. "We need someone who has been in both worlds, who knows what combat medicine looks like, and also knows what a civilian hospital floor looks like on a Tuesday when nothing is going wrong and everyone has forgotten why the protocols matter." Emily thought about all of it. The 8 years, the 4 deployments, the manila envelope in a closet she no longer had, the 4 complaints that went into silence, the morning a security guard's hand closed around her arm while 43 people looked at the floor. She thought about Marcus Webb, making the right clinical call and being afraid of it. About Damaris covering patients without being asked. About Tobias, who had come to work one Thursday and ended up changing the entire shape of the day by pulling a piece of footage and sending 8 words to someone he barely knew. She thought about Kwan, who was now doing physical therapy walks up and down the SICU corridor twice a day and had sent her a text that said simply, "Still here, thanks to you and like 6 other people." She thought about the difference between hiding and choosing, and how she had spent 4 years confusing the two, and how the confusion had cost her something she was only now beginning to calculate the full price of. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me," said Colonel Souza. "The curriculum includes a module on institutional accountability, specifically what nurses and junior medical staff are supposed to do when the system around them fails. Real protocol, real channels, real teeth."
Not aspirational language in a binder somewhere. A brief silence. "That's an unusual condition for a trauma training program." "I know." "I think," Souza said carefully, "that's going to be approved. And I want Marcus Webb considered for the civilian nursing cohort. He's exactly who this program should be training. Send me his file." "I will." "Anything else?" Emily looked at the grocery cart, which had completed its slow journey, and tapped the concrete barrier with a small anticlimactic sound. "No," she said. "That's it." 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning that was cooler than the weeks before it had been, Emily Carter walked back into Redstone Regional Hospital's emergency department for the first time since the morning she'd left. Not as someone returning out of obligation, not because the paperwork of reinstatement required her presence. She came back because she had decided to, because the distinction between those things mattered to her, and it always mattered to her, and because there was a difference between finishing something and letting it finish you, and she had always known which one she was built for. The department looked the same. Hospitals always looked the same. The monitors beeped the same frequencies, the linoleum had the same scuff patterns, the overhead lights hummed in the same key. Bay 4 was occupied. Bay 6 was empty. The nurses' station was staffed by a mix of people she knew and one she didn't. Damaris looked up, said nothing, just held up her coffee cup in a small acknowledging gesture. And Emily nodded back. Marcus was at the medication cart. He saw her and stopped. Something moved in his face. Relief, maybe, or the thing that lives just under relief. "You're back," he said. "For a while," she said. "Then I'll be in and out." "The training program?" "Word travels." "Tobias," he said. "Of course." She went to the locker room, put on her scrubs, clipped her badge to her collar, looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, not examining, not performing, just taking a second to register the fact of where she was standing and why. She looked tired around the eyes, which made sense. She looked like herself, which also made sense. She had not transformed. She had not been reborn. She was the same person she'd been on the morning Voss had looked through her like she wasn't there, with the same hands and the same history and the same 4 complaints in a drawer somewhere that had eventually, against significant institutional resistance, been heard. That was not a tidy story. It was not the kind of ending where everything resolves cleanly and the person who survived comes out without scars. She had scars. She'd had them before any of this. What she had now, that she hadn't fully had before, was the knowledge, specific, documented, confirmed, that the quiet work she had done over 4 years had mattered. The notes she'd written, the complaints she'd filed, the clinical calls she'd made correctly, alone, in rooms where no one was watching. All of it had existed even when it appeared not to. All of it had been real even when the institution around her refused to see it. That was the thing nobody tells you about the kind of quiet that she had chosen. The world reads silence as absence, as compliance, as invisibility, as not being a force to be reckoned with. It almost never occurs to people that someone might be silent, not because they have nothing, but because they have learned exactly when to speak and when to let the record accumulate. She went back out to the floor, took report from the outgoing nurse. Bay 1, Bay 2, checked on Bay 4. Charted her initial assessment with the precision she'd always charted. The precision that had made attending physicians uncomfortable in a specific way she now recognized as their problem, not hers. At 9:43 a.m., her phone buzzed. Bowen. A photograph. Quan, outside the hospital's front entrance in civilian clothes, duffel bag over his shoulder, squinting against the morning sun with the slightly surprised expression of someone who has recently been given back something they weren't certain they'd get to keep. Below the photo, one line. Walking out under his own power. Wanted you to know. She read it twice, standing at the nurse's station with a chart in her other hand. She typed back, good. Then she put the phone in her pocket and went back to work. Not because anyone was watching, not because there was something to prove or a point to make or an audience to perform for. She went back to work because this was what she did, who she was, what she had always been even in the years when the building around her had tried to convince her otherwise. The strongest person in a room is not always the one who makes the most noise, is not always the one who holds the most formal authority, carries the most prestigious title, commands the most visible power. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who has been right for years, quietly, without recognition, and who kept going anyway. Not because they were certain the record would ever be corrected, but because the alternative was to become someone who stopped caring whether it was. Emily Carter had never stopped caring. And on a Wednesday morning in Brookhaven, in an emergency department that was already, quietly, beginning to become something different from what it had been, a department where a nurse's correct call would be documented and defended, where a complaint would not disappear into a drawer, where the protocols had teeth because someone had demanded it in writing before she agreed to anything, she picked up her next chart and kept going. That was the whole story. And it was enough.